Today, the United Arab Emirates agreed to a historic peace agreement with Israel dubbed the Abraham Accords. Is this the prophesied peace agreement that starts the final 7 years to the second coming of Jesus Christ in the Battle of Armageddon? Well, I'll answer this question on today's edition of End of the Age. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Dave Robbins. I'm with Endtime Ministries. I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of End of the Age. And I know that a lot of you guys, I've been all over our social networking sites and on my email and on my phone today. A lot of you guys are just as excited as I am to hear the news. But the title of my program today is Not the One, but a Step in the Right Direction. So what happened? Well, there was a joint statement of the United States, the State of Israel, and the United Arab Emirates discussing and announcing a peace agreement between Israel, clear up here on the map, and the United Emirates, clear down here on the other side of Saudi Arabia. And it states this. I want to give you just a few excerpts from that announcement. President Donald Trump, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, and Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, and the Deputy Supreme Commander of the United Arab Emirates, they spoke today and they agreed to the full normalization of relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. The historic diplomatic breakthrough is going to advance peace in the Middle East region, and it's a testament to the bold diplomacy and vision of the three leaders and the courage of the United Arab Emirates and Israel to chart a new path that's going to unlock the great potential in the region. Delegations from Israel and the United Arab Emirates, they're going to meet in just the coming weeks to sign a bilateral agreement regarding investment, tourism, direct flights, security, which is very important. I'll get into some of the security here in just a moment. Telecommunications, technology, energy, healthcare, culture, the environment. I mean, they're going to completely enmesh their societies. The establishment of reciprocal embassies and other areas of mutual benefit. And they're opening direct ties between two of the Middle East's most dynamic societies and advanced economies that's going to transform the region by spurring economic growth, enhancing technological innovation, and forging closer people-to-people relations. Now, we're talking between Jews and Arabs here. Now, I've been to Israel many times, and I understand that the Jews and Arabs really get along pretty good. The people just amongst themselves in their shops and in the streets and different things. It's normally the heads of state and the politicians that are keeping everything all stirred up and so much chaos going on. Well, it looks like they're going to tie these together in this agreement. And as a result of this diplomatic breakthrough, and at the request of President Trump with the support of the United Arab Emirates, Israel will suspend declaring sovereignty over areas outlined in the President's vision for peace. I'll talk about that more in just a little bit. And it's going to focus its efforts now on expanding ties with other countries in the Arab and Muslim world. One of the main ones will be Saudi Arabia, which is right here, this big nation right here in the middle of it all. This would be very key because one of their points of contention, the biggest point of contention in the Middle East, is Iran, right up here at the top. And we're going to get off into a lot of this today, but I want to make sure I cover this peace deal first. So the United States, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates, they're confident that additional diplomatic breakthroughs with other nations are possible and will work together to achieve this goal. And this normalization of relations and peaceful diplomacy, it's going to bring together two of America's most reliable and capable regional partners. Israel and the United Arab Emirates are going to join the United States to launch a strategic agenda for the Middle East to expand diplomatic trade and security options. That's one of the main ones for the United States and Israel, security options. Remember, because I said Iran, it's possible that we could have been at war with Iran for the last several decades because of what they're trying to do, expand their kingdom and reach around the world. Along with the United States, Israel and the United Arab Emirates, they share a similar outlook regarding the threats and opportunities in the region, as well as a shared commitment to promoting stability through diplomatic engagement, increased economic integration, and closer security coordination. Today's agreement is going to lead to better lives for the peoples of the United Arab Emirates, Israel, and the region. The United States and Israel recall with gratitude the appearance of the United Arab Emirates at the White House reception held on January 28, 2020, because a lot of people's question is, well, what about Trump's peace agreement? Well, they mention this in the statement that they made today and the agreement. So I know I'm coming up to a break, so I'll have to get to that in a moment, but they did not leave out President Trump's vision for peace that he announced on January 28th. So I know we're coming up to a break. When we get back from the break, I'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about the prophesied agreement and what's going on in the news.
Major internet companies are silencing and censoring Christian voices online. These companies are trying to control what you see and hear. Almost 200 videos of ours have been marked as restricted online right now. That's why we launched End of the Age Plus, a platform where the truth won't be censored, a platform where we can preach the message of the gospel. When you subscribe to End of the Age Plus today for just $12.99 a month, you can watch all of our content in a secure, easy-to-view way from your favorite device. When you go to watch.endtime.com and subscribe, you'll get instant access to all of our teaching resources, including Revelation, the Unveiling of Jesus Christ, Understanding the End Time, End Time Magazine, and so much more. We will not censor our message to comply with what the world deems as politically correct. Go to watch.endtime.com right now or search End of the Age Plus in the App Store or Google Play.
We've seen Bible prophecy fulfilled like never before. From the halls of the United Nations to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, End Time Ministries continues to reveal the Bible prophecy in the news headlines around the world every day. Whether it's through our broadcast or online at our Jerusalem Prophecy College, your gifts enable us to put vital materials in the hands of those who need it most. Because of you, we continue to replace fear with faith in the hearts of Christians around the world. We will continue to see prophecy come to pass at an even swifter pace. We need your support. Your donation of any amount enables us to continue to broadcast and be a voice in the ever-growing censored media. To become a partner or give a one-time gift, visit endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME right now. That's 800-363-8463. Go online now. Visit endtime.com.
So the document that announced the agreement between the United Arab Emirates, Israel, and the United States, it did not leave out President Trump's peace initiative, the Vision for Peace. It said that at the White House reception that the United Arab Emirates attended back on January 28th, at which the president presented the Vision for Peace, and they expressed their appreciation for the United Arab Emirates and their related support for the statements. So the United Arab Emirates have expressed support for President Trump's peace initiative, along with many other nations. And they said this, they said the parties will continue their efforts in this regard to achieve a just, comprehensive, and enduring resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as set forth in the peace initiative, and all Muslims who came in peace may visit and pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Jerusalem's other holy sites should remain open for peaceful worshipers of all faiths. And then Prime Minister Netanyahu, Crown Prince Zayed Al Nahyan, and they've expressed their deep appreciation to President Trump with his dedication to peace in the region and to the pragmatic, unique approach that he has taken to achieve it. Now, one of the things I will tell you real quick, I talked about this months ago, is that President Trump's first trip after he was inaugurated overseas was to Saudi Arabia. It was not to Israel. Israel, this little red nation here, the United Arab Emirates, this red nation down here, you can see how far apart they are. President Trump came to Saudi Arabia because he realized that to get the Palestinians to finally come to a negotiating table, that he would need to get the Arab nations on board with this. What has happened in previous administrations and their peace initiatives is that they would bring the Palestinians and the Israelis to a peace negotiating table, and the Arabs, if the Palestinians, if they didn't like what was going on at the negotiating table, which they never do, then all they had to do is say, well, no, we've got to go back. This doesn't comply with the Arab initiative, and they would get up and just walk away. They had like a veto power. And they would fall back on their Arab brothers that said, no, we don't want to sign a peace agreement with Israel. But so Donald Trump said, well, I tell you what I want to do. He talked about doing a peace agreement even before he was elected. So when he got elected, rather than coming over here and say, okay, Israel and the Palestinians, you guys have to come to a peace table and negotiate, he came straight to Saudi Arabia, because what he was going to do was to take away the veto power of the Palestinians. They're not going to be able to fall back on their Arab brethren if President Trump can get all these Arab nations on board. And I heard his speech today, and he said that we've got the United Arab Emirates on board, and we're working with many other nations, and good things are in the works. He said, I can't talk about them right now, but he said, I can tell you good things are in the works. So, one of the sticking points that is in the Middle East, and I'll talk to you about this before I get into the White House statement right now, is Iran. And what all of these nations here feel threatened by Iran. Iran's trying to take over pretty much the Middle East, really the world, but right now they need to get the Middle East. So Saudi Arabia, which is a Sunni Muslim nation, all of these nations here are Sunni Muslim. Iran is Shia Muslim. And so they're at odds with each other. So Saudi Arabia, they know that they could never defeat Iran one-on-one. All of these nations do. So they need Israel and the United States as a security measure against Iran. Now, if you've got the United States behind you, Iran would never want to mess with the United States. So President Trump knows that. So he came into Saudi Arabia, then he went to Israel. He's been around all of these nations. And his team, Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, Avi Berkowitz, they've been to all of these nations, and they've been working to get a regional agreement. Well, so think about it like this. You've got Israel. Israel has a peace agreement with Jordan right here next to them. And then they've also got a peace agreement with Egypt, which is right here. And so imagine if they could get one with the United Arab Emirates, which it appears just was announced today. Imagine if they could get one with Saudi Arabia right here. And let's say Qatar. And some of these other ones around here. Imagine if they could get these peace initiatives with all of these. Then you go back to the Palestinians and you say, okay, Palestinians, now we want you to come to the peace table. Everybody else has signed a peace agreement. What about you? Now, that's one scenario that could really play out. And if you understand what President Trump is talking about, he just said, hey, many good things are happening. We're already talking to other nations and looking in this direction, but we also still want the Palestinians to play ball. And they said, we haven't forgot about that. In the official announcement, they said, we haven't forgot about the peace initiative with the Palestinians. And we want to work to get something done to that end. And so look at what's going on with this regional. The United Arab Emirates is just the first step. And like I say, years ago they signed them with Jordan and Egypt, now the United Arab Emirates. And if President Trump can get some more of these other nations on board, you see how this thing could really come to pass. Now, when you talk about the election, I don't know what's going to happen with the election. The Bible says there will be a peace agreement signed in the Middle East. Joe Biden is pretty much against what President Trump has done. He would want to take us back several years under the Obama administration and those previous negotiations. Does that mean, am I predicting President Trump will get reelected? No, I'm not. All I'm saying is there will be a peace agreement signed in the Middle East, and what the previous administrations have done has not worked. But if you could get all these Arab nations on board and then look at the Palestinians and say, we need you to come to the peace table now for negotiations, and all of the other Arab nations have normalized relations with Israel, and they would say, yeah, Palestinians, get on board, you can see how this thing would be pushed across the finish line. You say, well, Dave, what are you saying? Is this not the peace agreement? No, this is not the prophesied peace agreement of Daniel 9:27. This is not the one. You understand, that's even though I know President Trump called it the Abrahamic Accord, the Abrahamic covenant of Daniel 9:27 goes back to when the Lord promised Abraham a nation in the promised land, up here in this region, through the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You see down here how far the United Arab Emirates is located away from Israel. So this is not the peace initiative, and I'll get into some of that here in just a moment, but this is not the prophesied one. I know when I heard the news, I was jumping up on my desk like everybody else was. My phone, I don't even know if I have a phone left. It's been smoking for the last couple, 2 or 3 hours, because everybody's been texting me. In fact, our Facebook social networking went crazy, and I totally understand that. But this is not the one, but like I say, I just gave you a scenario where it's a step in the right direction. Now, the White House made a statement. They said that President Donald Trump has secured the first agreement to normalize relations between Israel and a major Arab country in decades. He brokered an agreement to normalize relations between the Arab Emirates and Israel, and it's the first agreement between Israel and a major Arab country since 1994, over 20 years ago. And they've committed to exchanging of embassies and ambassadors. So, I mean, they're all on board. And they're going to begin cooperation in, like I said, in a broad range of fields, including education, healthcare, trade, and number one, security. That's the kind of the 800-pound gorilla in the living room here, is security. Iran. And the peace agreement. Those are the two things between the Palestinians and the Israelis. That's what President Trump would like to get. Now, he'd like to see peace in the Middle East, yeah. But he'd really like to see it between Israel and the Palestinians, and he'd like to see a huge buffer zone, a cooperation here between the Middle East and Iran. Because what he's doing, he's kind of redrawing the scenario that the boots on the ground, what's really happening here in the Middle East. With signing an agreement, a peace agreement with the United Arab Emirates, an Arab nation, to work with them on security. I mean, think about that. What's Iran thinking about this? So the White House went on to say that the historic breakthrough is the most significant step towards peace, like in the Middle East, in 25 years. The United Arab Emirates is the first major Arab state to recognize Israel since the Israeli-Jordan peace treaty was signed back on October 26, 1994. And they said, we want to build a more peaceful and prosperous region. So this agreement is going to help put the region on a truly transformative path, one with stability, security, and opportunity. They're talking about huge financial opportunities for this region right here. Imagine Israel with their tech savvy and their smarts and their military teaming up with some of these Arab nations against Iran, and financially. It would be, I mean, I would be taking a second look at all of this if I was Iran. Now, of course, Iran, they would tackle anybody and then deal with the consequences later, because the politicians really don't care about their people. And so President Trump knows this. So that's why he's doing several different things here. It's not just this peace agreement. There's a whole lot more to it than that when you talk about what's going on with Iran. So the White House went on to say that this agreement, it's a major breakthrough for Muslims throughout the world who wish to come in peace and pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, as they know that they'll be able to fly to Tel Aviv from Abu Dhabi, right here in the United Arab Emirates. They're going to get on a plane and fly straight there. That was not possible before. Now they could go right into Tel Aviv, go there and pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then fly back. So this is humongous. It's a humongous announcement today. And if some of these other Arab nations realized that they could do that, then they might get on board with this agreement. And then they would look at the Palestinians and say, hey, we've normalized relations with Israel. You guys live right down here in the Gaza Strip. Why can't you get something done with them? And they would start to begin to pressure them. And President Trump knows this. Him and his team, very smart. They know what's going on. And he's trying to get a peace deal signed. Now, again, people have said, well, hey, you guys are predicting President Trump's going to get reelected. That's not what I'm doing. I'm telling you what the Bible says is going to happen. Could it be somebody else besides Donald Trump? Yeah, possibly. The international community is going to have to be involved, because we know that the Antichrist is going to come from the European Union. So somehow or another, the European Union's got to get involved. The international community is going to be on board with this. The White House went on to say, by encouraging more visits by the Arabs to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, it's going to help counter the extremists who use this false narrative that the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is on the Temple Mount, is under attack, and that Muslims cannot pray at that holy site. So expanded business is one of the other things that they're saying will happen. All of this financial ties between the two are thriving economies that will also accelerate growth and economic opportunity across the Middle East. Imagine the opportunity if all of these nations got on board. And this agreement is going to allow further advancement of the President's vision for finding a comprehensive, fair, realistic, and lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinians in the region. Every announcement that I've heard by President Trump, the White House, by most of the news sources, they always put in there Israel and the Palestinians, which is what the prophesied peace agreement calls for. Now, I want to give you a few news sources on what they've said, because some of them go into more detail. Fox News, they reported that Trump announces a historic peace agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. Today, they said that he had a call with Israel and the United Arab Emirates, and that the President told reporters that it's going to begin cooperation across the board and exchanging embassies and ambassadors. And the President said that he expected other countries to follow the United Arab Emirates' lead on this effort to cooperate with Israel going forward. That's one of the initiatives that he wants to get passed. He wants to get all of these nations on board. We've talked about it for months, a regional agreement. And he also said that the action would be known as the Abraham Accord, named after the father of all three great faiths. Well, I know he named it the Abraham Accord, but that's not what the Bible says is the Abrahamic covenant that will be signed. And I'll be getting into some of that on the latter part of the program. I wanted, for those of you that are going to cut off in the first 30 minutes to get the news portion of it. So they went on to say that no person better symbolizes the potential, Abraham, for the unity of these three great faiths. That's what David Friedman said when he announced it in the Oval Office today. And he said, we're already discussing this with other nations. So you'll probably see others of these get on board before very long. Again, he's wanting that regional agreement, because what's he wanting to do? Well, he wants to have a regional agreement here against Iran, but he also wants them to help him with the Palestinians. And according to the Israel National News, President Trump said, things that I cannot talk about are happening right now. Great things. But he said, I just can't tell you about them right now. He doesn't want to reveal them to the world. But I promise you, I know that they've been to these other nations and they've been working with them. And then the Debka file said that this was Israel's third peace accord with an Arab nation after Egypt in 79 and then Jordan in 94, and the third with a Gulf Arab government. Netanyahu government has for some years maintained mutual satisfactory, albeit informal, ties with the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. So Netanyahu has also been working with these nations for years, but they don't talk about it much in the news. And so there's a lot of things that have been going on behind the scenes. If you really follow it, you can keep your finger on the pulse. But if you're just kind of going through and not really, you're just watching the surface news, you wouldn't know any of this was going on. And all three of these share with Trump and the Trump administration a common concern over, they all mention Iran and the belligerent expansionist objectives in the region. Iran is the big sticking point. They're the ones that have been shooting missiles, and they took, you see right down here where the United Arab Emirates is located, this area right here is the Strait of Hormuz. In between the United Arab Emirates and Iran, this is where they sunk that. They had a battleship, an aircraft carrier that they took out there that looked like one of the United States aircraft carriers. They took it out here and they sunk it right here in the Strait of Hormuz. This is only about 29 miles wide at the widest stretch. Well, that's right there by the nation. That's in between the United Arab Emirates and Iran. So you can see strategically on a security level how important it is for us to have normalized ties between the United States, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates in case something kicked off with Iran in the near future. The Bible talks about World War III, and I'll get to that if I have time by the end of the program. So they also said that Riyadh may be expecting the following, which right here in Saudi Arabia, to follow the United Arab Emirates into normalizing ties with the Jewish state. And so when we get back, I've got a few more news clips for you, what's going on, some more added detail, and then we'll get off into the prophecy, and then I'll talk to you some more about the regional situation, and then if I have time, we'll talk about World War III, prophesied in the Bible.
Move Mountains with Irvin Baxter. This book by Irvin's grandson provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your relationship with God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at Endtime will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real life change. Get your book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
I have left a piece of my heart in Israel people. We would like to thank Endtime for doing such an awesome job with our Israel tour. We marvel at your team keeping the time schedule, keeping everyone comfortable, the wonderful driver, the brilliant guide, the entire tour program, good hotel choices, and stellar food. We had the privilege to rub shoulders with Pastor Baxter, listen to his current teachings, and had some interesting questions answered so eloquently. He is wonderful. Helene from Australia.
Experience the Holy Land in the most amazing way. Join Irvin and Judy Baxter for our upcoming Israel tour. For more information, go to endtime.com or call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archive button.
Okay, everybody, so you know that for those of you that are down here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we've got a conference. We've only got 4 conferences left this year, including the one coming up this weekend. We were, because of COVID-19 situation, we've got all of our conferences pretty much have canceled except 4. And this will be our last one anywhere in this Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex this year. And it's going to be at the Pentecostals of Fort Worth. This coming Saturday evening, Irvin Baxter is going to be teaching 666, the Cashless Society. That's Saturday, August 15th. It's going to be at 6 p.m. And then on Sunday morning, August 16th at 10 a.m., he's going to be giving Breaking Prophetic Fulfillments. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. Everybody you'll get to stand there with a mic and ask him questions. You can go back and forth. Irvin and his wife will be there. Me and my wife will be there working the table and talking to you guys. So come out. It's our last conference this year in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. So join us over there in Fort Worth. It's at the Pentecostals of Fort Worth, 10264 West Point Boulevard in Fort Worth, Texas, 76108. If you need directions, you need some more information, the phone number for the church is 817-560-3433. And I know that they've purchased some masks for everybody, and they've got everything set. Everything's clean. They're ready for you to come in there. No, you don't have to worry about COVID-19 and all that. They're having church. They're having a great time. And so on a regular basis, so come join us for the conference. Irvin Baxter and myself this coming Saturday evening and Sunday morning. Look forward to seeing you. Okay, now, a lot of people have said, well, hold on a minute. Netanyahu and Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, he was fixing to annex the West Bank. What happened to all of that? That all goes away, right? Well, because in the agreement they said that they would ask Israel, that the United Arab Emirates and the United States would ask Israel to not annex, to freeze their annexing of the West Bank. And so you say, well, what's happening with that? Well, if you go to some of the Israeli sources, they tell you what's really going on. A Likud, which is Prime Minister Netanyahu's party, a member of the Knesset, they actually said, hey, we're still going to annex the West Bank land. It was Likud, member of the Knesset, Shlomo Kari. He told Channel 12 News that Israel did not agree to any retreat from its position on annexation. They said that we don't give up anything. Sovereignty is still on the table, and it's going to happen, and we're just waiting for the United States. And they said that this is a peace deal born of strength, not of retreat. And Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi said in his first reaction to the United President Trump's bombshell announcement, he said the establishment of formal relations with the United Arab Emirates opens the door for additional agreements. And then they said, of course, President Trump said that the ice has been broken and I expect more Arab Muslim countries will follow. And they said that Israel remains committed to annexing parts of the West Bank. This was a senior Israeli official. And listen at this. They said that the Trump administration asked Israel to temporarily suspend the announcement of applying sovereignty in order to first implement the historic peace agreement with the United Arab Emirates. This comes from this Israeli official. So it's not off the table. They didn't lose anything. The Trump administration just asked him just to hold off enough till we can get this deal done. So Prime Minister Netanyahu, he confirmed that. He said that he was asked if he supports a two-state solution, and Prime Minister Netanyahu said that he's committed to the Trump peace plan, and he called it the most realistic peace plan since 1967, and he refused to define what a Palestinian entity would be, and he repeated that Trump only insisted on a temporary pause in annexation plans, not to take them off the table completely. So I had a lot of people emailing, well, what about all the annexation plans? What are they going to do now that they've got this thing done? And it told them to freeze them. Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that all they asked him to do was to temporarily pause the annexation plans. It's a very important part of this scenario, because what they're wanting to do, again, is to get everybody on board here, to get the Palestinians to the negotiating table, to get them to play ball. And so the Israel Hayam, that news source, they said for the Palestinians who have they've long relied on Arab backing. Now, I've talked to you about this. They long relied on Arab backing in their struggle for independence. The announcement marked both a win and a setback for the Palestinians. While Thursday's deal that it halts Israel annexation plans, The Palestinians have repeatedly urged Arab governments to normalize relations with Israel until a peace agreement establishing an independent Palestinian state is reached. So there's a lot of people that are saying, that believe that in the Trump administration, that if we can get these Arab nations on board, get them to sign, which today, that's why it's so important. The United Arab Emirates getting on board and doing this, it's the first nation. The Trump administration believes in a long line of other nations that would get on board. They could say to the Palestinians, look, this is not, you can't fall back on your Arab brethren anymore. You can't go back to the Arab initiative. We need to get something done. Everybody else has normalized relations with Israel. You guys need to do the same. Now, I told you that this is not the prophesied agreement with, the prophesied Palestinian-Israeli peace agreement. And because you say, well, how do you guys know that it's between the Palestinians and the Israelis? Again, remember, I told you the Abrahamic covenant that God promised Abraham back in Genesis 15:18 was to this up in here. The Bible says from the great river Euphrates all the way down to the great river in Egypt. So this here's the promised land. If you see this map, it would come from right up in here all the way down to the great river Egypt. So that's the promised land right up here. The United Arab Emirates is not land that God promised Abraham. He promised him right up in here. Genesis 15:18. Let's talk about it. So the Palestinian-Israeli peace agreement. The prophecy of the coming peace agreement is found in Daniel 9:27. The Bible says, and he, who's the he? The Antichrist. He's going to confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. It's a 7-year period. And in the midst of the week, it's a week of years. In the midst of the week, 3.5 years in, the Antichrist is going to cause the sacrifice, the oblation to cease. For the overspreading of abomination, he's going to make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. So, again, the he in verse 27, it's not the Pope, it's not the false prophet, it's going to be the Antichrist. It's not, and again, it's not President Trump, because we know the Antichrist has to come from the revived Holy Roman Empire or the European Union. And the covenant that he's going to confirm is God's covenant with Abraham, Genesis 15-18. It says in the same, so it says, in the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, right here, and from the river of Egypt, right down in here, the great river of Egypt, right here, up to the river Euphrates, which is right up here, and this big block right here. This right here, you can see Israel only has just a very small portion of the entire promised land. So the covenant that God promised, that God's promised that the land of Israel will belong to the descendants of Abraham forever, the confirmation of the covenant will be when the Antichrist confirms that Israel has a right to live in the nation of Israel, the promised land that was promised to Abraham by God. And the passage says that this confirming of the covenant, Daniel 9:27, that it's going to last for a week of years, or a 7-year period. So the prophesied peace agreement is going to contain 5 elements. Now, I read to you most of the agreement between the United Arab Emirates, Israel, and the United States. It doesn't have any of these provisions in it. Why? Because it's not the one. It's clear down here. It's about prosperity, security, different things like that. But the 5 elements of the prophesied peace agreement is, number 1, the area of Judea and Samaria, which is up here in Israel, clear over here in the West Bank region, part of Israel, that this area of Judea and Samaria, it's going to be given to the Palestinians as their homeland. The Jews living in the Palestinian homeland are going to be allowed to remain out there as a Jewish minority in that Palestinian homeland. So the Bible tells us there will be a peace agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis. You say, well, how do you know it's not between the United Arab Emirates and Israel? Because the United Arab Emirates are not fighting for this property here. Who's fighting for that property on the earth? Who's fighting for the West Bank right now for a 2-state solution? It's the Palestinians. The third characteristic would be that the Temple Mount is going to be placed under a sharing arrangement, so both the Muslims and the Jews will be allowed to worship there. And these things are mentioned in President Trump's peace initiative. The fourth characteristic of the prophesied peace agreement is that the Jews would be allowed to build their temple on the Temple Mount without disturbing the Dome of the Rock or the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And the fifth characteristic would be that the issue of control over Jerusalem will remain unresolved, and consequently its status is going to be put off until later. According to the Bible, it's going to be a 7-year period. And of course, right now, Israel controls all of Jerusalem. And they're going to retain control of that all the way to the Battle of Armageddon. And Zechariah tells us that they will, at the Battle of Armageddon, they're going to lose half of the city, which means they've been in control of the entire city up until that point. So let's talk about a Palestinian state in Judea, because a lot of people have said, well, hey, this is the agreement. This is the one. I've had people calling me ever since they made the announcement. Hey, is this the one? No, it's not the one. Again, but it's a major step in the right direction. You can see I've laid that out for you today. So Matthew chapter 24, verse 15 through 16, and then verse 21. The Bible says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation occur. Remember, that was spoken of by the prophet Daniel. Stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Jesus foretold an event called the abomination of desolation. And other passages clearly tell us that this event will happen 3.5 years after the Palestinian-Israeli peace agreement is signed. And he warned that the Jews who were living out in Judea will have to flee for their lives. So obviously Judea is going to be under enemy control at that time. And it's going to be a Palestinian state created out there. It's exactly what's in President Trump's deal of the century. It's on page 12 specifically. The vision is a fair compromise, is what it says, and it contemplates a Palestinian state that encompasses territory reasonably comparable in size to the territory of the West Bank and Gaza pre-67. And the map that accompanies Trump's peace plan shows the vast majority of the Palestinian state's going to be in Judea. It's about roughly 70% of that area. And the United Arab Emirates said that they're actually on board. They support President Trump's peace initiative. So did the Saudi Arabia and many other nations. They're on board with it. And so who's the only kicker here? It would be the Palestinians. And so the Bible says there's going to be a peace agreement signed with them before it's all over with. When we get back, I'll go through a little bit more, and then we'll talk about a regional situation and what's going on there. So don't touch that dial.
Most of us walk around day by day blind to the prophecies being fulfilled right before us. Every news report brings a new piece to the puzzle in the race towards the final 7 years and the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, more than ever, it is important for God's people to understand the times in which we are living. On November the 12th, 2013, we opened our Jerusalem Prophecy College in downtown Jerusalem. These same courses are now available online for people who are unable to attend the classes in person. We welcome students to join us and discover the link between current events and the prophecies of the Bible. Take your place in the prophecy of Daniel 11:33. Enroll in the Jerusalem Prophecy College today. Go to JerusalemProphecyCollege.com.
So Jesus actually prophesied that the Jews would stay in that new Palestinian state. Now you understand this is a 2,000-year-old prophecy. And in Matthew chapter 24, 15 through 16, it clearly states that there will be Jews living in Judea at the time of the abomination of desolation, which would occur 3.5 years after the Palestinian-Israeli peace agreement. Well, then in President Trump's deal of the century, on page 12 again, the Israeli population, it states this, I'm quoting, the Israeli population located in the enclaves that remain inside the contiguous Palestinian territory that are part of the state of Israel shall have the option to remain in place. We're not going to evacuate everybody unless they chose to otherwise maintain their existing Israeli citizenship, move into Israel proper, whatever they want to do. So this describes Israelis living inside the new Palestinian state, being able to stay there and still be citizens of Israel, but they're going to be completely surrounded by Palestinians. Well, then you had President Trump's peace plan. On January 28th, President Trump made his speech revealing the overall contents of the peace plan to the entire world. And the contents of the deal of the century were also published at the White House website. And you can go check it out. You can view that you go to whitehouse.gov and look up the Peace to Prosperity. And it's the deal of the century. So the question is on the table, is the deal of the century the peace plan prophesied in the Bible? I've already explained to you that the deal that was announced today is not the one. It's not even near the region that we're talked about here in God's promise to Abraham back in Genesis 15:18. That's clear up here by the nation of Israel. But a lot of people have asked, is the plan that President Trump gave? Well, it really certainly appears to be. Can I say that 100%? No. I mean, another one could come along tomorrow. But let's talk about it. What the Bible says will happen under the prophesied peace agreement. Okay, the Bible says that there's going to be, again, Palestinian state in Judea. Jews can stay in that Palestinian state. The Temple Mount's going to be shared. A Jewish temple is going to be built on the Temple Mount. And Israel will control the undivided city of Jerusalem. Well, what's going to happen under the Trump peace plan? Well, there's going to be a Palestinian state in Judea. Jews can stay in the Palestinian state. The Temple Mount's going to be shared. President Trump's plan does not mention specifically whether the temple is going to be built there or not, but it does leave an avenue for that. It talks about that all nations should be able to pray there according to their traditions. Well, Israel's tradition is you've got to have a red heifer, you've got to have a sacrifice, the red heifer for a purification sacrifice. They build their third temple and they start up sacrifices again for the atonement for sin. So if you go down that avenue, it does leave a route for them to build their third temple. And then, of course, Trump's plan says that Israel will control an undivided Jerusalem. So 4 of the 5 conditions of the biblical peace agreement are included in President Trump's peace plan. And, of course, the one element that the prophecy doesn't include is, in Trump's plan, it's just simply not addressed one way or the other. So where do we go from here? Well, the nations of the world, they've really grown weary with of this 70-year Palestinian-Israeli conflict, including some of the Arab nations. The Palestinians have rejected every peace proposal that's been offered, no matter how generous it was. I mean, there have been people that have been willing to give them the Temple Mount, pretty much all of the, or a big majority of the West Bank, and they've said, no. They just rejected it. And to many people's surprise, 23 nations, now this is what I want you to get. This is very important. 23 nations have voiced their support for the Trump peace plan. And these include 7 in the Middle East nations. There is Egypt. So think about this. Where am I at here? There is Egypt right here. Saudi Arabia right here. They've expressed their support. There is Qatar right here. There is Bahrain, which is right in here. There's the United Arab Emirates, which is here in the red. And look at what happened today. There's Morocco, and then there's Israel. So you can think about it, that all of these nations have said, yeah, we agree with President Trump's peace initiative. Well, so far, only 2 have rejected the plan. Iran, right here. Obviously, the big, now that's the other 800-pound gorilla in the living room. There's 2 big ones. and then, of course, the Palestinians right here. Well, again, these are Sunni Muslim nations. This is Shia Muslim. So really, Iran in this situation, that's a non-factor. But all of the rest of these, if you can get them on board, you can look at the Palestinians and say, hey, what are you, all the rest of your brethren, you can't look back on them. And so the question is, you know, when we're talking about Trump's peace initiative, is if this is not the agreement, then what's the significance of today's peace deal and a region? Because we know this, the agreement today is not the deal. And we don't know if President Trump's, it appears, I'm saying it appears, likely, that President Trump's deal is the peace initiative. It goes way past any initiative that's ever been laid out there. And so it's highly likely that it is, but today's is not. So if today's is not between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, then what's the significance of today's peace deal and this regional agreement in the Middle East between Israel, the United States, and the Arab nations? I mean, how Israel and the Arab world, and this is I want to go through an article, just a few excerpts from an article from Carnegie. And the title of it was How Israel and the Arab World Are Making Peace Without a Peace Deal. Nobody thought that was even possible. And they said without much fanfare. Now this is what's been going on behind the scenes a lot of people don't even know about. Without much fanfare or notice, within the last few months, the first known commercial aircraft from the United Arab Emirates recently landed at Israel's Ben Gurion Airport. Just the last few months. And it was carrying COVID-19 supplies for the Palestinian Authority, but Israel allowed them to drop it in the Ben Gurion Airport, which is, out of pique, had rejected them. And as unprecedented as the flight was, it really shouldn't have come as much of a surprise. For the past 5 years, contacts between Israel and the Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, have been booming. But again, the news doesn't report on this all the time. And the examples of what amounts to a great thaw in an otherwise frozen political landscape, they're very plentiful. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, together with his wife and the director of Israel's Mossad intelligence service, they've been received all the way down here in Oman. You can see, okay, now I love these computers, all the way down here in Oman. And by the late Sultan, he was met by the United Arab Emirates and Omani foreign ministers in the U.S., Israel's Minister of Culture. They visited Dubai here in the United Arab Emirates, including Jerusalem's chief rabbi. They've been welcomed in Bahrain, and Bahrain has reached out to Israel for help battling COVID-19. But it's not, you don't hear about it in the news all the time, do you? And Israel athletes have competed in judo competitions in the United Arab Emirates, where for the first time the Israeli national anthem was played and the Israeli flag was displayed in an Arab nation, folks. Trade between Israel and the Gulf states is now estimated at about $1 billion a year. So today was a normalization of a treaty that was announced, but they've been doing things for years now. But now they're willing to say, yes, the United Arab Emirates are willing to say, hey, we're willing to recognize Israel. One Israeli-owned company, AGT International, has reportedly concluded an $800 million deal with the United Arab Emirates for border surveillance equipment. Because look at where these guys are at compared to Iran right here. And this partial list of compromises, these are only visible signs. Much more on the intelligence and security side is reportedly happening below the waterline. And even more stunning, this is taking place on the watch of a right-wing Israeli prime minister who didn't even feign interest in a two-state solution, and he's doing everything that he can to ensure that one never emerges by keeping large parts of the West Bank and all of Jerusalem. But he's willing to annex a lot of it and to, I don't know, we'll see what happens with the Palestinian state. We know one's going to be created. How that takes place, I don't know for sure. But contrary to the warnings from the diplomats, analysis, and these peaceniks who predicted Israel would become a pariah if it didn't settle up with the Palestinians, that Israel seems to be making more progress towards normalization with Arab regimes without a credible peace process than with one. But I promise you, what's going to happen is when they if they normalize with all these nations, the only one left is going to be the Palestinians. And all of these other nations are going to say, look at how much prosperity and opportunity and security that we have by normalizing ties with Israel. You guys need to get on board with the game here. And so that could be how all this could come down. And that's what President Trump's looking at. Again, remember, his first flight overseas after getting elected, he came to Saudi Arabia, not Israel. So clearly the Gulf states aren't on the verge of full, or many of them are on the verge of a full normalization with Israel. It appears that way. And the Arab world possibly could be willing to maybe untether itself from this emotional pull with the Palestinians. I mean, a lot of them are on board. Many, they've expressed they're advocating that their support for President Trump's peace initiative. And so, even though the most skeptical observers would have to admit something has changed. So what can we do to explain the shift? What's happened in all of these Arab nations against Israel, who for years have been completely against Israel? Well, according to this article with Carnegie, there were 3 significant factors. The rise of Iran. The number one was the rise of Iran and these Sunni jihadists, these spewing their terror across the region that has created a narrow but important coincidence of interest between Israel and the Arab world. These guys, they need Israel's security measures against Iran. That's one of the main things. And then, of course, the increasing exhaustion and frustration with the never-ending Palestinian cause has opened up more space for Arab states to follow their own interests. And then behind it all lays the white horse of this eager to marshal the Arabs in the service of this anti-Iranian and pro-Israel agenda. So there you have it. There's 2 big scenarios going on here. There is the peace initiatives here with all these nations, not just the United Arab Emirates, and what's going on with the Palestinians. And then there's the scenario with Iran, that many of these nations need Israel and the security of Israel and the United States. And so, because of what Iran is trying to do across the region, that's the reason we've talked for months now about regional agreements. So today, pretty important deal. God bless.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of Endtime Ministries. If you're not currently a partner with Endtime Ministries, or if you would like more information, we invite you to call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or visit us online at endtime.com.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page.